Okay, we are back. Matt is reading. He is reading. Me. I am Matt. I am reading Words of Radiance, and I just finished part two of Words of Radiance. I said in my last video that whenever I went to review The Way of Kings, it was just way too long, way too much for me to have to try to dig through and put into a video that wasn't an hour long. So I'm trying to break up this book in each part. This book is 5 parts, so I'm expecting 5 videos for this. And part 2 of Words of Radiance really was part 1, very fast paced. Jasna dies. I don't think she's actually dead. And then part 2 kind of kicks right off. I think this is the first time I think we meet Eshonai, who is a Parshendi shard bearer, which is really interesting because we don't know, at this point, we don't really know anything about the Parshendi, and we're starting to get these interludes that are pointing to who they might be. We know that Shallan and Jasna believe that they are the Void Bringers, but we still don't know them as a people. We don't know their culture. We don't know their religion. We don't know their political structure in any way. And we start to get a little bit of a picture in that, where in this first interlude with Eshonai, and I think I'm saying that right, Eshonai, that's at least how I've been saying it in my head. Jasna was right. There is a city on the Shattered Plains. It's where Urethru is, where all the Parshendi are. And what I think is interesting is maybe it's just the size of the world, but I don't know how people didn't know this. Was it really that deep into the Shattered Plains that people just would not have been able to even get there to explore it? I just feel like it's, in this world, it's so vast, so unexplored. As a reader, and then even as the people, there's areas that they don't know where things are. They don't know, their maps are, we've seen in this book so far, and even in the last book, like, maps are somewhat unreliable of the Shattered Plains. Nobody really knows about the Shattered Plains, which is just so interesting to me because it was 1,000 years ago that the last desolation happened, or hundreds of years ago that the last desolation happened. And that's whenever the plains themselves shattered. And I guess just all of that knowledge was lost. I'm interested to figure out how all that comes together. But we get a lot in this part. We get a lot of Pattern and Shallan, a lot of their relationship building. In my last video, I said that Shallan had this fear of the Pattern, and she is starting to figure out what the Pattern is. The Pattern's starting to grow, just like Syl was growing in her knowledge and becoming more human or sentient, had more of a conscience. The Pattern also has that same relationship with Shallan, which I think is really interesting. The duels that Adolin is getting into, he's kicking butt in all these duels. So I'm curious to see how all this plays out. I know his goal is to ultimately duel Sadie's, but every time he goes into a duel, he just basically kicks butt with everybody he's in at that point. And then this chapter, or this part, goes a lot back in time to Shallan. The Pattern also talks a lot about Shallan's past. The Pattern at one point said that he was there with Shallan whenever whatever happened between his dad or Shallan's dad and her mom. Whenever all that went down, the Pattern was in the room with Shallan, which I also thought was really interesting. That this Spren has been with her for a very long time, even though she didn't know it. We also get a little bit more details about Helleran, Shallan's brother. He apparently is a shard bearer, but he's ostracized by her dad, which I don't quite understand. I know that their family basically at this point hates one another, but you would think that Shallan's dad, who is this power-hungry person, would want a shard bearer to be beside him, and he's basically just kicked him out. So all the way through this point, through book 1 and in book 2, I've gotten frustrated that Kaladin doesn't really tell anybody. His lack of trust of any Light Eyes doesn't allow him to really tell anybody anything about who he is, the powers he has, what he's experiencing, or even of his life experiences. But we do get that in part 2. Kaladin tells Dalinar about how Amaram basically betrayed him. And Dalinar's response was really frustrating. I think I expected when this was going to happen that Dalinar was going to come down on Amaram really hard, but we don't get that payoff yet. So I don't know if that's going to be in this book or future books. At the beginning, I had thought that Amaram's going to die at the end of this book, and maybe that still happens. Maybe Dalinar eventually has Amaram killed for being an awful, terrible person. But there's also, speaking of people who might die in this book, the king, assassination attempts keep happening against him. We don't know who's behind them. Kaladin is part of the guard of the king, and he also has no idea how it's happening. He's much smarter about trying to figure it out than many people are. He's often the detective that figures out, oh, this actually would have been a shard bearer that was involved with this assassination attempt. So Kaladin is showing many strengths as a leader. He's showing many strengths just as somebody who understands the assassination attempts. He's a good soldier. He's a good guard. Kaladin's pretty good at everything he does right now, except for communicating with people, which is frustrating, but it's still on that arc. He'll eventually get there, I think. We also meet Tin in this part, and I think Tin is fantastic. She's a funny character. She's tough to everybody that she's with. She takes leadership, but we don't know really anything about her. I feel like I trust her at this point. I think that Tin is a good character, and then right at the end of part 2, Shallan kills Tin, which just blew me away that Tin was hired to assassinate Jasnah. The people who hired her knew that Urethru was a city, like they believed things that Jasnah was saying, but they still wanted her dead. I don't know why, but so much happened in this part, including Kaladin meeting Shallan, which was a hilarious chapter where she is pretending like she's somebody else. She's being a con artist. You know, she's Adolin's betrothed, but she's coming into the Shattered Plains pretending like she's not. And she plays Kaladin to eventually have Kaladin forcing himself to give her his boots, which I just thought was very funny. Whenever I was thinking about what would it be like whenever Shallan meets Kaladin, what would that look like? This was not what I expected. I did not expect her to con him into Kaladin giving her his boots. Very funny. I really liked it. So a couple predictions based off of what I've read so far into the rest of the book, and thoughts in general. I was shocked when Shallan killed Tin because I really thought that Tin was going to be a powerful character moving forward. I was even thinking maybe Tin is part of the Knights Radiance, and she died. So I guess that's not anymore. I really did like her character while she was there. I was expecting her own big arc that was going to be across multiple books, but she was really only in one part of the Words of Radiance. Now, I think that her influence, the people who hired her, are going to play a major role. We don't know much about them yet, but I think they're going to play a major role in probably many of the books. And at this point, during that chapter when Kaladin and Shallan meet one another, I have just this feeling that they're eventually going to have a romance with one another. I know that Shallan is betrothed to Adolin, but I just feel like it's going to come out that, like whenever all the dust settles, that Shallan and Kaladin are going to end up being together. I could also see it being Adolin, and I would be fine with either. I'm not even sure what I necessarily prefer, but I think I would lean Adolin and Shallan. I think that they would be great together. I don't think that Adolin is a Knights Radiant. I do think that he is just somebody who's a fantastic warrior. But I do... so I lean Adolin and Shallan, but if Kaladin and Shallan get together, I think that could be a great story, great arc as well. So really like this part. Things are really kicking off in this book. I think it's on pace to be my favorite Brandon Sanderson book so far. I mean, I loved Mistborn, I loved Warbreaker, I really did like The Way of Kings, but this book has just been so fast-paced this entire time. It's got me on the edge of my seat. I can't stop reading it, can't put it down. It's just a great story, great book. I'm looking forward to coming back in part 3, making some more predictions, giving my thoughts. If you are through part 2, let me know your thoughts in the comments. I would like to discuss what your thoughts are going to be on the rest of the book, what you think is going to happen. But this is a spoiler video. It'll be in the title. And maybe at the end of the book, I'll decide to do a non-spoiler review just of what my thoughts were on the book compared to all the other Sanderson books or just fantasy books in general that I've read, I can say that this is going to be one of my favorite ones that I've read so far. So anyway, this is Matt is reading. This is part 2 of the Words of Radiance. And as always, you can follow me on Peloton at Matt is Sweaty. We'll see you whenever I finish up part 3.